All right, so today we're going to dive into something, well, a bit unsettling. Child marriage, but, and this is what's got me interested, within Christianity specifically. You sent over some excerpts from this article, and wow, it really gets into it. Like, how common was it? Who was actually doing this? And, the big question, what did people think was okay morally back then?
Yeah, no easy answers here. The article definitely brings up some tough stuff to think about, for sure.
Yeah, like right away, it's pushing back on this idea that child marriage, it's something that happens over there. But then, bam, it's like, hold on. It's woven right into Christian history, too.
And not just some random cases. We're talking kings and queens, big names, people you'd read about. Makes you wonder what we choose to remember and what we kind of brush aside.
For sure. So jumping in, the article spends a lot of time on the Catholic Church. They had rules about this, right? Like ages you had to be to get married.
Yeah, they did. The Roman Catholic Church back then set the minimum age at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. No, that might still seem young today, but, back then, people didn't live as long.
So I guess getting married young wasn't as out there as it seems now.
Oh, exactly. But, and this is where it gets interesting, even with these ages, right? The article finds tons of times they just ignored them. And often, get this, with the Pope's okay. They called it a papal dispensation.
Papal dispensation, like a hall pass, but from the Pope.
Basically, and they've got this example, Isabella of France, 10 years old, married off to Edward II of England. The Pope gave the okay, even though she was way younger than the supposed rule.
10 years old. It's hard to even imagine what was going on. Why would the Pope even allow that?
Well, you got to remember, marriage back then, especially for rulers and such, it wasn't about love like we might think today.
Or like a power move, right? Political.
Exactly. It was about making alliances.
Yeah.
Preventing wars, who gets what land, all that. So Isabella, she was a piece in this whole game between England and France.
So these kids were like pawns. That's kind of messed up.
And the article really hones in on that. You can tell they're bothered by the power dynamic. Like, how can a kid really consent to that?
Makes sense. But they also talk about how child marriage was different between like the Western and Eastern parts of Christianity.
Right. It existed in both, but it seems like it wasn't as common in the Orthodox Church as it was in the West. The article seems to think it's because of different cultures and laws over there.
So it's more complicated than just Catholic versus Orthodox.
Way more. Like, they mention how in some Orthodox areas, like Russia, they had different rules about marriage ages. Oh, and get this. They even say the Ottoman Empire, Islamic, might have actually made child marriage less common in some places.
Hold up. Wasn't the article, like, criticizing Islam for this earlier? Now it's saying the Ottomans might have done the opposite.
See, this is what I mean. It's all tangled up. Makes you realize you can't just put things in neat boxes. What each religion did, how cultures mixed, it's messy.
So it's not like this religion, this rule, all the time.
Exactly. And the article's really trying to figure out that mess, I think.
Okay, so we've got all this going on, religious stuff, power plays, different cultures, all around this child marriage thing. Where do we even go from here?
I think the article wants us to start asking some really uncomfortable questions about, like, power, consent. What does it even mean to have a choice in a relationship? And that's where it gets really interesting.
It's weird. We talk about history, right? Like big wars, who had power, all that. But we forget it's all about people, real people living through this stuff.
Right. And I think that's what this article is trying to get us to see, especially with child marriage. These weren't just deals. They were someone's life, especially these girls.
Like Isabella of France. We talked about her. Married at 10. Sent off to a whole other country. It's just...
Yeah.
But what was that like for her emotionally? It's hard to even imagine.
Totally. To be so young, but expected to act like royalty, deal with all those politics.
And on top of it, the pressure to have a kid.
Yeah.
Like, their whole kingdom depended on it, probably. And she's just a kid herself.
The article mentions that a lot of times those girls, they didn't really get to grow up naturally, like emotionally who they were.
It's like their childhood was sacrificed so that some king could get what he wanted.
Yeah, that's unfortunately accurate a lot of the time.
But it's not always so simple, huh? The article does say sometimes those women, even married young, they found ways to, actually DO stuff, make their mark.
Oh, absolutely. There's this one, Irene Duquesne, she's in the article. Married young, became a Byzantine empress, had real power, even stood up to the Pope once.
Whoa, no one messing around with her. So even with everything stacked against her, she found a way to make it her own.
Exactly. It's never just one thing. History. Even in the worst situations, people, they find ways to adapt, resist even. Sometimes they even do great things.
Good point. Like, we can't just assume everyone back then was the same. People are complicated. Their experiences were different. But that makes me think, how do we judge the past then? Like, isn't that what they call cultural relativism?
Yes. Cultural relativism always gets people going, especially when we're talking about stuff that today just feels wrong.
Yeah, because, I don't know, it feels wrong to judge people back then by, like, what WE think is right now.
I get it. Their world was different, you know. Their beliefs, what society was like. It's not fair to look at it only through today's lens.
But then again, we can't just ignore child marriage, act like it was no big deal, right?
Definitely not. We have to recognize the harm it caused, how unequal the power was. Those girls, their voices were silenced.
So how do we find a balance? Be honest about history, but also stay true to what we know is right.
It's tough. Really tough. No easy answers. This article, though, it feels like it wants us to sit with that discomfort, asking those hard questions. History isn't just facts in a book. It's like a conversation with the past, and it's still going on.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive, from like the Pope giving permission slips
Yeah.
to Byzantine empresses, all to figure out this child marriage thing in Christianity. Lots to unpack.
It really is. And, you know, I'm struck by how, well, the article doesn't try to hide how messed up this all is, like emotionally.
Yeah, you can like feel it in their writing, how much it bothers them, especially when they get to those arguments people used to, I don't know, justify this stuff. Even today sometimes.
Right. And that part's fascinating. They go into how people try to make it sound okay, and then they pick it apart, show why it's so messed up.
It's like they'll say it's better to like mold a young girl into the perfect wife. Like somehow women now are corrupted or something. Make you think, wow, some things haven't changed much, huh?
It's really about control when you get down to it. Like,
Right.
they want a person, a woman, to fit into this box they have in their head. And the article's like, no way, that's not a partnership, that's messed up.
Trying to make being controlling sound nice when it's obviously not.
Yeah, exactly. And the article, it cuts right through that, reminds us who really has the power in those situations.
You said, some people still think this way, even now. That's kind of scary. So, like, how do we make sure this stuff stays in the past?
That's the million-dollar question, right? The article even says there's no easy fix. These old ways of thinking, they're stubborn, even when you show them the harm it does.
So it's bigger than just changing laws.
Yeah.
Right. It's like what's in people's heads has to change too.
Exactly. And that takes time. Education, the article says. Like, we got to teach people to think for themselves, talk about this stuff openly. And I think those girls, those women, they got to know they have power too.
To like stand up and say, nope, not doing that. Break the cycle.
Yes. And we're all responsible, not just them. We got to build a world where marriage, any marriage, it's about respect, equals. You know, actually choosing to be together.
That's a good note to end on, I think. So listeners, I hope this got you thinking. It's like they say, knowledge is power. And facing these tough parts of history, that can lead to good change. So keep learning, keep asking those questions, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.